Today's session is on the topic of paper. Paper happens to be one of my favorite things, believe it or not. It's very inexpensive. In fact, the cost of paper seems to be going down and down over time, which is great when you love to use a pencil or paper, or even doing crafts with your kids is a great use of paper. But what's interesting about paper is it's very low cost, and you can use it almost immediately without any training or major investment into technology. Now, most people come from a world of paper in terms of a business ownership, and paper was something that has been widely replaced for the most part by any business that's scaling. So where paper beats out digital is in what I like to call the investment. An investment in a paper-based process is much lower compared to a digital transformation of inventory management. For companies that want to experiment, research, simulate, do things on the cheap, there are scenarios where you want to skip over some steps, so to speak. Let's take a look at the most common operation where you need to look at, and that would be in picking orders. Picking orders is typically done with a invoice or a sales order document that's printed out and handed as a stack, usually to somebody out in the warehouse who would sort through this stack and hand them off to individuals that are going to do the picking out in the warehouse. And the process is very simple and low tech. Very little amount of need for investment, very little amount of need for training. Another interesting area where paper can be very advantageous is, again, getting back to the concept of limited investment. Many times to turn on a digital system, it requires hours and hours of integration between the system that's going to be generating the requests, such as typically an ERP system, and the inventory management platform. In this case, you've got a lot of time to ensure that you've tested all the scenarios. Examples would be shortages of goods, or overpicking, or prioritization that needs to be adjusted in real time. These are all areas where it takes a lot of time to ensure the digital system is ready to scale automatically without human intervention. That takes time and investment. One thing paper can do is, when you take a paper document, let's say a pick ticket or a sales order invoice, if you take that, you can actually set up technology that allows you to integrate into a digital transformation system, such as a inventory platform, with very little cost by using something called document parsing. There are services available and from many different vendors that allow you to set up and train AI so that it'll recognize the different components on a piece of paper. That piece of paper, of course, can be sent digitally through an email as a PDF or any kind of a format that you want. By training that OCR read of that document, again paper, you can now translate that into API calls into a digital system. So you're halfway there for much less of the investment that you typically would have to do to jump right in and do a full integration. This technology makes paper better. Better because it gives you a low adoption cost to get started and allows you to do trial and error and research into simulating and ensuring that investments are going to truly work. Because integration itself is a big risk factor and cost element when going live with systems like this. In a paper-based scenario, some of the things you may have to consider would be to only deal with the shorts. Those orders that are not enough inventory to fulfill all of it would have to be sent back through an exception to some manual operator who would have to update those quantities on the sales orders before invoicing to the customers. But other than that, it's a pretty sweet way to get started on digital technology just using paper. The last example I want to give around the benefits of paper is something I learned as I was going live with a client in Texas. They were a company that is very large volume, many operators in the facility. And as you know, in some areas of the country, the pay and the job experience of some of the operators in a warehouse doing picking for fairly low cost inventoried items, it means that turnover can be very prevalent. And therefore, the skill and training that many of these individuals have is somewhat limited. It makes going live in a new digital system really challenging because you have to ensure that you've simulated load as best as possible before the day of go live. Why? Because these types of systems break down on those fringe cases where you have load on a system or process. Let me give you an example. On the day we went live for a customer who was taking about 50 individuals, taking them from a paper-based world into a digital system, it was somewhat about training, but less about the actual individual training of the application and more about discovery of a bottleneck in the process, which led us to find a lot of value in paper one more time. You see, what was happening was we developed a process where a warehouse administrator would go through and assign each individual the appropriate order that they wanted them to work on. That makes fine sense, and you train that individual on how to assign an order to an individual and have them go out and start picking away. The problem is that scalability became a real issue. Imagine having the start of the day with 50 people standing in line, ready to get their first order. The backlog immediately became apparent, and it was a very big slowdown to productivity for that first few hours. At first, I recommended just auto-assigning all of the orders out across to all the users, and it becomes a first come, first serve on each of the order selections on the list. However, that wasn't going to work for them because it still was very important for them to select which orders were going to go to which individual pickers due to the amount of penalties and the importance of each of those orders and the size as well. After we thought about how to continue to allow that handoff and selection process to continue, we needed to find a quick way to ensure that they'd be able to continue doing that process. So we decided to print out the pick tickets, the sales orders, just as they had before, along with a barcode at the top of the page. And so therefore the operations administrator in the warehouse could select very quickly, still based off of a paper, and hand it off to the picker. And the picker would then scan that barcode to immediately jump right into the order that they were being asked to pick. So it's an example of where paper really saved the day for this customer. Now, eventually their plans was to continue to move away from paper, but because of the ability to mix two different processes and two different individuals, one that has lived on paper and had done a certain process, and the other being digital, those two worlds could come together by using a barcode to span across those two worlds. And it was a great way to go over the problem and solve it very quickly. So to summarize, paper can be a great asset for those three reasons. Number one, a low-cost, low-investment approach to just researching or determining if a broader process is going to work. Number two is to use it as a way to, again, do more research and experimental processing without a large investment in integration by using technologies like OCR recognition. And third, to bridge the gap between a manually processed world and the bottlenecks that can occur with a process getting it into the digital hands of the pickers themselves.
Thanks for listening. To access more resources like this, including blogs, articles, webinars, and more, visit the WithoutWire content portal at withoutwire.com.
WithoutWire is a cloud-based inventory management service that brings science to barcode scanning for field techs, manufacturers, or warehouse pickers. Within minutes, you can set up your own personalized environment. With our embedded Microsoft Power BI and SQL reporting services, you'll get live views of your activity from nearly any device and form factor including iOS or Android-based smartphones, tablets, and rugged purpose-built scanning devices. WithoutWire. Inventory management solutions without equal.